Just one match, just 90 minutes on the pitch. And the 2026 World Cup produced a record that no coach would ever want to hold. He lost his job, not after the group stage, not after being eliminated, but immediately after his team's very first match of the tournament. A decision that sent shockwaves across the football world. At first glance, the story seemed simple. His national team had just suffered one of the worst defeats in World Cup history. The defense collapsed. The tactics failed. Fans were furious. The media quickly turned against him. But if you think that one defeat was the only reason behind his dismissal, then you are missing the most important part of the story. Because the truth is that the storm had been building for months. Trust inside the dressing room was slowly disappearing. Pressure from the federation kept growing. A series of disappointing results had already placed his position in serious danger. The match in Mexico was not the cause. It was simply the final straw. And what happened next created an event that had not been seen in nearly a century of World Cup history. The story began on a Sunday night in Mexico. Firing a coach after a single match sounds almost unbelievable, especially when that match takes place at a World Cup, where pressure is always at its highest. Many people believed the federation had overreacted, that they had simply panicked after a heavy defeat. But the deeper you look into the story, the more different it becomes. Because the loss to Sweden was not the beginning of the crisis. It was the final chapter. A final chapter that had been written long before the referee blew the opening whistle. Warning signs had been appearing for months. Disappointing results continued to pile up. Doubts inside the national team kept growing. And by the time the World Cup began, this coach's position was already hanging by a thread. The real question was not why he was dismissed after the match. The real question was, what had gone wrong, long before the tournament even started? What pushed the situation to a point where it could no longer be saved? Before the 2026 World Cup began, Tunisia was not considered a favorite to win the tournament. But the team still arrived carrying significant expectations. This was an experienced squad. A national team that had appeared on football's biggest stage multiple times before. The man chosen to lead them was Sabri Lamouchi. He returned with the goal of taking Tunisia further than it had ever gone in the past. At first, the atmosphere was positive. Fans believed in the project. The federation offered its support. The players appeared ready for the challenge ahead. But football does not run on belief. It runs on results. And Tunisia's results gradually became a serious problem. In the months leading up to the World Cup, the team struggled to find consistency. They often looked vulnerable against stronger opponents. Defensive mistakes became a recurring issue. The overall style of play lacked cohesion and confidence. With every match that passed, the pressure grew heavier. The media began asking difficult questions. Supporters slowly lost patience. Criticism became louder and more frequent. Even then, few people expected everything to collapse so quickly. After all, the World Cup was still ahead. A chance to turn things around. A chance to prove that the difficult period was only temporary. But then the match against Sweden arrived. And what followed quickly turned into a disaster. On a Sunday night at Estadio Monterrey, Tunisia entered its opening World Cup match, hoping to pull off an upset against Sweden. But within the first few minutes, it became clear that things were not going according to plan. Sweden started the match full of confidence. They controlled possession more effectively. They attacked with greater precision. And most importantly, they converted nearly every dangerous opportunity they created. Tunisia's defense was repeatedly stretched apart. More and more space began to appear across the field. Every Swedish attack made Tunisian supporters increasingly nervous. Then the inevitable happened. The first goal arrived. Then came the second. Then the third. Everything unfolded with stunning speed. Tunisia had almost no answer. Meanwhile, Sweden's attackers continued to punish every defensive mistake. Alexander Isak made his mark on the match. Viktor Gyökeres also played a key role. But the player who made the game truly memorable was Yasin Ayari. The young Swedish midfielder scored 2 goals in the contest. What made the story even more remarkable was that Ayari's father was born in Tunisia. In other words, a player with Tunisian roots helped sink the national team of his own family's homeland. It was a detail that made the defeat feel even more painful. When the final whistle blew, the scoreboard displayed a result that no Tunisian supporter wanted to see. Sweden, 5. Tunisia, 1. One of Tunisia's heaviest defeats in World Cup history. But nobody knew that the events on the pitch were only the beginning. The real earthquake was still waiting behind the doors of the dressing room. After the match, Sabri Lamouchi appeared before the media with a look of deep disappointment. He did not try to make excuses. He did not blame the referee. He did not blame bad luck. Instead, he admitted that the team had made life difficult for itself. He described the defeat as painful, something difficult to accept, and the result of mistakes that Tunisia had ultimately paid for. At the time, those comments sounded fairly ordinary. A disappointed coach speaking after a heavy loss. But looking back, they were almost certainly among his final remarks as head coach of the Tunisian national team, because while he was trying to explain the defeat to reporters, important discussions were quietly taking place elsewhere. And with every passing hour, his future was being decided behind closed doors. If you look only at the 5-1 defeat against Sweden, it would be easy to assume that the result alone cost Sabri Lamouchi his job. But in reality, his position had been under threat long before the World Cup began. Throughout the months leading up to the tournament, Tunisia repeatedly struggled to meet expectations. The team lacked consistency. Friendly matches failed to build confidence. The same problems continued to appear again and again. Defensive mistakes became a recurring theme. The team's ability to control matches showed little improvement. Meanwhile, the level of competition continued to rise. Every disappointing result added more pressure to the coaching staff. But performances on the field were only part of the story. Inside the national team, signs of unrest had already started to emerge. Several players were reportedly unhappy with the way the squad was being managed. Certain personnel decisions generated controversy. Trust between the dressing room and the coaching staff gradually began to erode. Although nobody publicly admitted it, tension had existed within the camp long before the World Cup started. The Tunisian Football Federation was fully aware of the situation. Officials monitored developments closely. They listened to feedback from players. They watched a national team that was failing to show the progress many had expected. According to multiple reports, the possibility of changing coaches had already been discussed before the tournament. However, the World Cup was viewed as a final opportunity, a final chance for Lamouchi to prove that he was still the right man for the job, a final chance to silence growing doubts. But instead of creating hope, the match against Sweden pushed everything to its breaking point. It was not simply the defeat itself, it was the manner of the defeat. A team lacking organization, lacking resistance, lacking belief. For those already searching for reasons to make a change, that performance provided every answer they needed. And only hours after the final whistle echoed across the stadium, the wheels of history began to turn. After the defeat against Sweden, the Tunisian Football Federation quickly organized a series of emergency meetings. The situation was reviewed in detail. Everything that had happened over the previous months was carefully re-examined. In the end, a decision was made. Sabri Lamouchi would no longer remain in charge of the national team. The official announcement was released less than 24 hours after the match. The news immediately sent shockwaves through the football world. Not only in Tunisia, but across the global game, because this was not an ordinary dismissal. It was something that had never happened in modern World Cup history. A coach losing his job after just one match at the biggest tournament on the planet. Nearly a century of World Cup history had passed. Hundreds of coaches had come and gone, yet none had left their position so quickly. The 5-1 defeat entered the history books, not because of the scoreline itself, but because of everything that followed. And as Sabri Lamouchi walked away from the national team, a new question immediately emerged. Who could possibly rescue a World Cup campaign that was already on the verge of collapse? After dismissing Sabri Lamouchi, Tunisia had very little time to think. The World Cup was still underway. Crucial matches were still waiting ahead. The national team needed someone with enough experience to stabilize the situation immediately. And the name mentioned more than any other was Hervé Renard. This was not a coach unfamiliar with African football. He had already created several remarkable stories throughout his career. He was known for his ability to revive struggling teams, his ability to inspire players, and his ability to unite a divided dressing room. Those were exactly the qualities Tunisia desperately needed. However, this challenge was far more difficult. He did not have months to prepare, no testing period, no opportunity to build a new football philosophy. All he had was a handful of days. A squad coming off a crushing defeat, a dressing room filled with pressure, and a nation slowly losing faith. If he wanted to save Tunisia, he would have to do it immediately. Because at the World Cup, time is the rarest luxury of all, and the next mistake could erase every remaining hope. On the surface, this is a story about a 5-1 defeat, but in reality, it is the story of a crisis that had been quietly building for months. The World Cup simply became the stage where every problem was exposed to the entire world. Sabri Lamouchi did not lose his job because of 90 minutes on the pitch. He lost it because of everything that had happened long before that match began. And that is why this decision became one of the most controversial moments in World Cup history. What do you think? Was Tunisia right to dismiss its coach after just one match? Or did the federation act too quickly? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to hear your perspective on this story.